The galaxy had a habit of forgetting. Empires rose, burned bright, and vanished into dust. Wars that once shook entire star clusters were reduced to archived data, cold, compressed, and rarely opened. Even acts of heroism, the kind that should have echoed through eternity, were often buried beneath newer crises, newer fears. That was how humanity was remembered. A footnote. In the vast records of the Galactic Council, their near-extinction event was summarized in a single, indifferent line. Species 392A. Stabilized during stellar radiation collapse. External assistance noted. No mention of desperation. No record of the billions who almost died. No acknowledgement of how close an entire species came to disappearing forever. But humans remembered. 2 centuries earlier, their star had turned against them. A dying neutron star, light-years away, unleashed a violent flare that tore through space like an invisible blade. When it reached Earth's system, it poisoned everything. Radiation flooded their atmosphere. Satellites failed. Power grids collapsed. Crops withered in days. Oceans began to shift as if the planet itself was trying to escape its fate. Panic spread faster than the radiation. Humanity tried everything. They launched emergency shields, rerouted energy networks, even attempted desperate atmospheric repairs. But nothing worked. Every solution came too late, or failed entirely. Extinction wasn't a distant possibility. It was a countdown. And then, help arrived. Not from allies. Humanity had none beyond its system. Not from a coalition. No one had time to organize one. It came from a passing convoy of the Valkyrie. They were traders. Wanderers. A species known for profit, not charity. Their ships had been en route to distant markets when they intercepted Earth's distress signals. Fragmented, chaotic, filled with desperation. They could have ignored it. Most species would have. Stopping meant risk. Radiation exposure. Resource loss. Delayed trade routes. There was no logical benefit to helping a dying, unknown civilization. But the Valkyrie did something the galaxy would later struggle to understand. They chose to care. Their fleet diverted immediately. Massive shielding arrays were deployed into Earth's orbit within hours. Specialized drones entered the atmosphere, reinforcing its failing layers. Energy stabilizers were anchored across orbital space, forming a protective web that absorbed the worst of the radiation storm. It wasn't perfect. Millions still died. But billions lived. For the first time in weeks, the sky stopped burning. Humanity survived. When the crisis passed, Earth tried to respond. Governments, what remained of them, attempted to establish communication, to offer thanks, to promise compensation. The Valkyrie refused all of it. No trade agreements. No territorial claims. No debts to collect. Instead, they sent a single message before departing. Kindness is not a transaction. If you must repay it forward. And then they left. No celebration. No announcement to the wider galaxy. The event barely registered beyond a few scattered reports. To everyone else, it was insignificant. To humanity, it became everything. Because humans did not see it as kindness. They saw it as a debt. 200 years later, the galaxy faced something far worse than a dying star. It began at the outer edges, silent systems going dark. Then came fragmented distress calls, describing something impossible. Fleets that adapted mid-battle. Weapons that stopped working after a single use. Entire planets stripped of life within hours. The threat spread with terrifying speed. It was eventually given a name: the Carthel Swarm. It was not an empire, not a species in the traditional sense. It was a collective intelligence, billions of interconnected organisms acting as one, learning, evolving, and consuming without pause. Every attempt to stop it failed. The Galactic Council mobilized its greatest fleets. Ancient weapons were reactivated. Entire defense networks were pushed to their limits. Nothing worked. The swarm adapted faster than fear itself. World after world fell. Civilizations that had stood for thousands of years were erased in weeks. And as the final defensive lines began to collapse, as the galaxy prepared for the possibility of total extinction, a transmission appeared. Not from the Council. Not from any known fleet. Human. Clear. Calm. Unmistakable. We remember the debt. At first, no one understood. Then the message continued. Stand down. This war is no longer yours. Confusion spread. Then anger. Then fear. Humanity? The quiet species from a forgotten sector? They had not been seen in decades. Most believed they had chosen isolation. Others assumed they had stagnated. No one believed they mattered. And yet, as the message echoed across the stars, sensors began to register something impossible. At the very edge of known space, reality itself started to shift. At the edge of the collapsing frontier, the first warning wasn't a signal. It was silence. Deep space sensor arrays, spread across dozens of systems, began to fail all at once. Not destroyed. Not jammed. Simply overwhelmed. Streams of data flooded in faster than processors could interpret, cascading into errors, then into total shutdown. For a brief, terrifying moment, the galaxy went blind. Panic erupted inside the command chambers of the Galactic Council. Officers scrambled to reroute feeds. Backup systems flickered to life. Long-range telescopes recalibrated, trying to pierce the void where the Carthel swarm continued its relentless advance. And then, the darkness changed. Space itself began to ripple. Not like hyperspace transitions. Not like warp signatures. This was something deeper, something wrong. The stars stretched, bent, and folded as if reality had become fluid. Entire constellations distorted, their light curving around invisible shapes pushing into existence. And then they appeared. Not arriving. Not emerging. Appearing. Ships, if they could even be called that, materialized across the battlefield in perfect formation. Thousands of them, each one massive, dwarfing even the largest warships ever constructed by the Galactic Council. Their surfaces shimmered with layered energy fields that shifted constantly, like equations rewriting themselves in real time. They emitted no heat signatures, no conventional energy readings, no identifiable propulsion. They simply existed. Observers tried to classify them. Fleet designations were assigned. Tactical projections were calculated. All of it failed. Because this was not a fleet. It was something else entirely. At the center of the formation was a single structure that defied comprehension. It was designated, hesitantly, as the anchor. It dwarfed everything around it. A structure so vast it seemed to anchor itself to space rather than float within it. Light bent around its edges. Sensor beams fractured when they touched it. Even advanced AI systems hesitated when attempting to analyze its structure, as if confronted with something beyond their capacity to define. And then it spoke. A transmission cut through every frequency, every channel, every layer of communication across the battlefield. Human. Unmistakable. Debt acknowledged. Repayment initiated. No further explanation. No negotiation. No warning. The war began. The first engagement lasted exactly 12 minutes. That was all it took to change everything. The Carthel swarm reacted instantly, as it always did. Vast waves of bioships surged forward, adapting even as they moved. Defensive membranes hardened. Energy absorption layers shifted frequencies. Offensive structures reconfigured mid-flight. It had worked against every enemy before. It didn't work now. Human weapons didn't behave like weapons. There were no visible projectiles, no beams of energy, no explosive impacts. Instead, entire sections of the swarm simply ceased to exist. No debris, no radiation, no residual energy, just absence, as if something had reached into reality and erased them from the equation. The swarm adapted. It always adapted. New forms emerged within seconds, structures designed to resist whatever had just happened. Organic shielding shifted into unknown configurations. Signal patterns changed. Attack vectors multiplied. Human forces responded before the adaptation completed. Every change was anticipated. Every evolution countered. It was as if the humans weren't reacting to the swarm. They already knew what it would become. Across command centers, analysts stared in disbelief. Predictive models collapsed under the weight of what they were seeing. No species could adapt this quickly. No technology could operate this far ahead of real time. And yet, humanity was doing exactly that. The battlefield transformed. Where once there had been chaos, there was precision. Where once there had been desperation, there was control. Human ships moved with impossible coordination, shifting positions before threats even formed. Entire swarm offensives were dismantled before they fully emerged, their strategies undone by something that felt less like combat and more like inevitability. It wasn't a battle. It was a correction. Within minutes, the impossible became undeniable. The Carthel swarm, the unstoppable force that had consumed entire civilizations, was losing, not slowly, not uncertainly, completely. For the first time since its emergence, the swarm began to collapse. Clusters vanished faster than they could regenerate. Entire hive nodes disappeared mid-command, severing coordination across vast distances. What had once been a unified intelligence began to fracture under pressure it could not understand. And through it all, the human fleet remained silent. No battle cries, no declarations of victory, no communication beyond that single message. They had not come for glory. They had not come for conquest. They had come for one reason, a promise made 2 centuries ago. Across the galaxy, billions watched. Worlds that had prepared for extinction now stared at something far more unsettling. The quiet species they had ignored, the forgotten survivors of an old disaster, had returned, not as equals, not as participants, but as something else entirely. And as the human fleet advanced, unstoppable, precise, inevitable, a single realization spread through every civilization. This was not humanity at war. This was humanity paying a debt. As the war shifted from desperation to inevitability, panic inside the Galactic Council turned into something far more dangerous. Uncertainty. Victory should have brought relief. Instead, it brought questions no one was prepared to answer. Who were the humans now? And what had they become? The Council demanded answers. Emergency channels were opened. Long-range communications were broadcast toward the human fleet. Diplomatic protocols, unused for decades, were activated in desperation. There was no reply. But something else arrived. A data transmission. It did not travel through standard communication lines. It appeared, suddenly and completely, within the Council's most secure systems. Firewalls did not trigger. Encryption did not resist it. It was simply there, untouched, unstoppable, labeled in a single line. For understanding. What followed would later be described as the most important and most terrifying archive ever received. The data spanned 2 centuries. Human history, unfiltered. After their near extinction, humanity had changed in ways no external observer had noticed. While other species expanded outward, colonizing, trading, warring, humans had turned inward. They studied, not just technology, but consequences. Simulations filled entire planetary networks. Scenarios of extinction-level events were modeled endlessly. Rogue stars, collapsing ecosystems, interstellar wars, artificial intelligence revolts, unknown biological threats. Over and over again. The galaxy died. Sometimes slowly. Sometimes instantly. But in nearly every projection, civilization as a whole failed to survive. Humanity reached a conclusion no other species had dared to consider. Survival required more than strength. It required certainty. So they began to build it. The archives revealed projects that blurred the line between science and impossibility. Entire branches of physics were rewritten. Energy systems were developed that no longer relied on conventional laws. Space itself became something they could manipulate, not just travel through. But their greatest focus was not weapons. It was prediction. Humanity understood something the rest of the galaxy had missed. Every threat that seemed unstoppable had one weakness. It could only react to the present. So humans chose to fight the future. At the core of their advancement was a system the Council would later classify as cognitive warfare architecture. It was not a single machine. It was a network. Vast. Distributed. Integrated into every human system. It did not just process information. It interpreted intent. By analyzing patterns across time, behavior, adaptation cycles, decision-making pathways, it could determine not just what an enemy was doing, but what it would do, moments before it happened, sometimes minutes, sometimes hours, in certain cases, days. Against a conventional enemy, it was overwhelming. Against the Carthel swarm, it was absolute. The swarm adapted faster than reaction. Humans did not react. They preempted. Every mutation, every strategic shift, every evolution the swarm attempted had already been mapped in probability trees long before the first human ship appeared. The swarm was not fighting an opponent. It was colliding with its own future, and losing. But buried beneath all the data, beyond the technology and the strategies, was something far more unsettling. A directive. Simple, clear, uncompromising. Project. Debt Keeper. The Council focused on it immediately. Its purpose was stated in a single line. No act of kindness toward humanity will remain unpaid. At first, it seemed symbolic. It wasn't. The deeper the Council searched, the more they realized the scale of it. Humanity had catalogued everything, every ship that had ever sent aid, every species that had ever offered support, every individual act of compassion, no matter how small. Nothing was forgotten, nothing was ignored, and for each entry there was a response plan. Some were minor: trade support, medical assistance, technological aid. Others were not. Entire fleets had been constructed for scenarios that had not yet happened. Intervention protocols were mapped across the galaxy, response times calculated, outcomes optimized. Humanity had prepared not just to repay kindness, but to ensure that those who showed it would never fall. A realization spread through the council chambers, slow and heavy. This war was not an exception. It was a fulfillment. The Carthel swarm had threatened the galaxy. The galaxy had once saved humanity. Therefore, the outcome had already been decided. And then came the final layer of the archive, a quiet, almost overlooked note appended to the Debt-Keeper Directive. No elaboration, no explanation, just a statement. We are watching. Silence filled the council. Not fear of the swarm, not fear of extinction. Something else. Because for the first time, they understood the truth. Humanity had not risen to power for conquest. They had not built their strength for dominance. They had done it for repayment. And somewhere, across the vastness of the stars, they were still watching, waiting for the next debt to be called. The war ended without warning. There was no final battle, no desperate last stand, no climactic explosion to mark the fall of the Carthel swarm. One moment it was there, spanning systems, consuming worlds, adapting endlessly. The next, it wasn't. Gone. Not scattered. Not retreating. Not hiding. Gone in a way that defied understanding. Sensors returned nothing. Long-range scans detected no biological signatures, no debris fields, no residual energy. Entire regions of space that had once teemed with swarm activity now registered as empty, cleaner than untouched vacuum. Even the data logs began to behave strangely. Recorded battle footage glitched. Analytical records degraded. In some cases, entire segments of the conflict became incomplete, as if reality itself resisted preserving evidence of something that no longer existed. The galaxy didn't celebrate. It hesitated. Human fleets held their positions for exactly 3 hours after the swarm's disappearance. 3 hours of absolute stillness. Across hundreds of systems, billions watched. The massive constructs, those impossible ships, remained suspended in perfect formation. Their shimmering surfaces continued their quiet, unreadable shifts, like equations solving themselves in silence. At the center, the anchor remained motionless, a presence more than a structure, something that made even the concept of scale feel meaningless. No communication came from them, no declaration of victory, no demand for recognition, just silence. Inside the chambers of the Galactic Council, urgency turned into desperation. They had to respond. They needed to respond. Diplomatic channels were reopened. Messages were transmitted across every available frequency. Formal gratitude, requests for dialogue, offers of alliance. For the first time in its history, the Council asked. There was no reply. For 3 hours, the most powerful governing body in the galaxy waited, and received nothing. Then, without warning, a final transmission appeared. It spread instantly, overriding every system, every network, every communication device across known space. Clear, human, unmistakable. Debt repaid. Just 3 words. No elaboration. No farewell. No acknowledgement of the countless lives saved. And before anyone could respond, the human fleet began to move. They did not turn. They did not accelerate. They simply ceased to be there. One by one, the ships vanished. Not through hyperspace. Not through any known form of travel. They faded from existence as effortlessly as they had arrived, leaving behind no trace of their passage. Even the anchor disappeared the same way, a structure that had dwarfed entire stations, gone in an instant, as if it had never existed at all. Within minutes, they were all gone. The galaxy was left in silence, not the silence of peace, the silence of realization. In the weeks that followed, civilizations across known space began to change, not because of the war, but because of what it had revealed. Histories were reopened, archives re-examined, forgotten records brought back into focus. Species that had once overlooked small acts of kindness began to study them with new attention. A merchant ship that had once delivered supplies to a struggling colony. A rescue crew that had saved strangers drifting in the void. A minor species that had shared medical knowledge without asking for anything in return. Moments that had seemed insignificant, now felt important, because now the galaxy understood something it had never considered before. Kindness was being recorded. The name humanity began to carry a different weight. Not fear in the traditional sense. Something deeper, more uncertain. They were not conquerors. They did not expand. They did not demand tribute. They simply remembered. And when the time came, they acted. With precision. With certainty. With power beyond comprehension. Within the Galactic Council, a new doctrine was quietly established. Not a law, not an order, a recommendation. Encourage cooperation. Preserve acts of goodwill. Support developing species. No one said it openly, but everyone understood why. Because somewhere in the vast, silent expanse of the galaxy, humanity was still there, watching, tracking, remembering, not waiting for war, not searching for enemies, but observing something far more unpredictable, kindness. And one day, for reasons no one could predict, tied to moments long forgotten, they would return, not with fleets of destruction, not with demands or threats, but with something far more overwhelming, repayment. And when that day came, when the silent watchers stepped out of the void once more, every star, every world, every civilization would feel it, the same way they had felt it before, the same way they would always feel it. The galaxy would go quiet, because nothing is more terrifying than a debt humanity has decided to repay. For a time, the galaxy knew peace, not the fragile kind that followed war, where fleets lingered and borders bristled, but a deeper, quieter stillness. Trade resumed, worlds rebuilt. The memory of the Carthel swarm began to fade, like a nightmare that refused to fully form in waking thought. And yet, something had changed. No one said it aloud, but every civilization felt it. They were not alone anymore, not in the way they once believed. At the heart of the Galactic Council, a new division had formed, unofficial, unnamed in public records. Privately, it was called the Ledger. Its purpose was simple: track everything, not fleets, not weapons, not territorial disputes. Kindness. Every act of aid between species was recorded. Every rescue mission, every shared resource, every moment where one civilization helped another without expectation of reward. It was meticulous work, obsessive, even, because the Council had learned something from humanity. The smallest action could echo across centuries. At first, many dismissed it. A symbolic gesture, a philosophical shift. Nothing more. Until the first incident. It happened in a quiet sector, far from major trade routes, far from political influence. A minor species, barely spacefaring, had suffered a catastrophic reactor failure on one of their orbital stations. The explosion had crippled life support. Thousands were trapped. Their distress signal barely reached beyond their own system. No major fleet responded. No emergency coalition formed. But one ship heard them. A lone cargo vessel belonging to the Valkyrie. They weren't obligated to help. The risk was high. Radiation leaks, unstable debris, the possibility of secondary explosions. Their cargo was valuable. Their route was long. Stopping made no sense. And yet, they did. They diverted power, stabilized the station's failing systems, and evacuated as many survivors as they could carry. It wasn't enough to save everyone. But it was enough. Enough to matter. When it was over, they left quietly. No report filed. No reward requested. Just another act of kindness, small and easily forgotten. Except, it wasn't forgotten. 3 days later, the stars shifted. Not everywhere. Just there. In that quiet, overlooked system. Sensors flickered. Instruments failed. Space itself seemed to ripple, as if something immense was pressing against reality, preparing to step through. Panic spread instantly. Emergency signals were sent to the Galactic Council. Nearby systems raised defensive alerts. Civilian vessels scrambled to flee. Because everyone remembered. Everyone knew what came next. They appeared without sound. A formation of human ships, smaller than the fleets that had erased the swarm, but unmistakably the same in design. Their surfaces shimmered with that same impossible energy. Their presence bent light, distorted signals, and silenced every system that tried to fully comprehend them. At their center, a vessel, not as vast as the anchor, but close enough to make the difference irrelevant. The transmission came immediately. Human. Come. Absolute. Debt recorded. Across the system, fear froze into stillness. The rescued species panicked, unsure what they had done to warrant such attention. The Valkyrie ship, still within range, preparing to depart, halted completely. For the first time in their long history, the merchant species did not know what to do. The message continued. Act of aid confirmed. Casualty mitigation. Partial. Intent. Selfless. A pause. Then, repayment authorized. What followed was not war. It was transformation. Human vessels moved with quiet precision. Damaged infrastructure was restored in moments. Entire sections of the orbital station, previously beyond repair, were rewritten at the molecular level, rebuilt stronger than before. Radiation contamination vanished. Not contained. Removed. Energy systems were replaced with something new, something stable, efficient, and far beyond the original design. The surrounding space itself seemed to settle, as if corrected. Within hours, what had been a disaster site became something else entirely. A perfected system. And then, The humans turned their attention to the Valkyrie ship. For a moment, fear returned, because no one knew what repayment truly meant. A final transmission, directed only at them. Kindness returned. Their cargo holds filled, not with stolen goods, not with weapons, with resources, advanced materials, stabilized energy cores, technologies that exceeded anything the Valkyrie had ever traded or even imagined. Gifts, not equal to what had been given, but greater. No negotiation, no condition, no expectation. And then, just as before, the human ships vanished. Silence returned to the system, but it was not the same silence as before. This one carried understanding. Across the galaxy, the story spread, not as a warning, not as propaganda, but as truth. Humanity had not lied. They had not exaggerated. They had not acted for show. They remembered. They calculated. And when the time came, they repaid. Somewhere, beyond sensors and beyond sight, they were still watching, still recording, still waiting. And now, every civilization understood something that would shape the future of the galaxy forever. The most powerful force in existence was not war, not technology, not fear. It was this: that one day, no matter how small your actions seemed, humanity might decide, you are owed.